This is Richard Cullen. I'm the executive director of the Connect Everyone Coalition. We've got an exciting conversation for you today. Its title is Connected Outdoors, Safe Innovation for America's Adventurers. As a reminder, the Connect Everyone Coalition, or CEC, is a broad-based coalition made up of more than 120 members all across the country, and it really spans all across different industries and organizations with geographic diversity all across the country. And I'm really glad to see that a few of our members are joining us today virtually. Our mission is really simple. It's embracing every technology in our connectivity toolbox to finally and fully close the digital divide and ensure that every American, no matter where they live, work, or explore, has access to the reliable, high-speed internet that they need to thrive in our modern world. And we've had several of these webinars and conversations over the past year or so. And a lot of the conversations have to do with practical deployment capabilities of technology, whether it's agriculture, farming, healthcare, the space technology. But we're going to talk today about something that's really critical that we've referenced. It's just that this technology can be literally life or death for people. We're going to hear a real story about that and how it helps in public safety and other applications. So we think this is a very important conversation. So again, we're excited for today's discussion around the ways that low Earth orbit, or LEO, satellite technology is revolutionizing communication and innovation for outdoor recreation enthusiasts and everyday Americans alike. By incorporating this burgeoning technology, we can ensure that all America's adventurers have access to always-on connectivity, providing safe and innovative experiences for hunters, fishermen, hikers, emergency responders, and avid outdoor explorers everywhere. Our panelists today bring unique perspectives on how LEO technology is already playing a role in public safety and outdoor connectivity. If all of you would please take a minute just to introduce yourselves, I'd really appreciate it. So why don't we start on my top left, Eric and Nicole DeHaven. Tell us about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Nicole DeHaven.
Hi, I'm Eric DeHaven, her husband. I'm a longtime expedition adventurer and climbing and diving and jumping out of planes and everything else. So tend to get out into places where I'm not very well connected often.
Is that your dog behind you, Eric?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's
Cam.
Cam.
He's the boss. He's
And tell us about your coffee shop, House Coffee Co.
Oh yeah, it's a little passion project. I'm actually I'm a cinematographer in the film industry, and Nicole and I run another company where we rent equipment to the film industry. And then she was a chef for 30 years, and I'm a avid coffee fanatic. So we're actually calling you from a back room of our coffee shop as well. So
Oh,
yeah,
awesome. Well, thanks a lot.
yeah, thank you.
All right, Sheriff Mark Kreider, can you introduce yourself, please?
I don't know if I can go after that. I don't.
Right.
I sit in the office and drink coffee. Is that?
That qualifies.
Yeah. Mark Kreider. I'm currently the sheriff of Walla Walla County in southeastern Washington State.
Cool.
Thank you, Sheriff. And Laurie Barnhart.
Yes, good afternoon. And Richard, thank you so much for asking the Grange to join this. This is a great opportunity for us. My name is Laurie Barnhart, and I have been the legislative director for the North Carolina Grange for 13 years. And I'm a registered lobbyist. I lobby the North Carolina General Assembly, primarily around rural areas and agriculture. Not always, but mostly. And if you're not familiar with the Grange, just real briefly, I'm not going to go tell you a lot of detail, but we were organized in 1867. We are the oldest agricultural organization in the United States. And the North Carolina Grange was organized in 1926. So we are a state Grange, and then we have our national Grange. But when we started in 1926, it was at a time when farming communities were absolutely desperate for support in every way. They lacked in things that more urban areas were enjoying and benefiting from. The Grange was a huge early and an influential advocate for parent involvement in education, particularly in rural schools. they helped organize PTA and worked closely with the movement in its early years. And the Grange was a major advocate for rural electrification and rural-free delivery of mail and rural telephone service. So all of those things the Grange helped get off the ground, literally. And supporting the broadband movement since it's emerged has been another chapter in the Grange's long tradition of advocating for the infrastructure of rural communities they need in order to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive. And broadband, and just an aside, agriculture is North Carolina's biggest economic driver. It's huge here. I believe next to California and Florida, we have the most different commodities. It's tremendous, in case you all weren't aware of that. Broadband, and I grew up on a farm, so this to me was all so familiar. But broadband has certainly been a life changer for most people and organizations, and rural areas especially have benefited from it tremendously because they are more isolated.
Well,
Thank you.
Laurie, thank you for that. And I've been working on broadband issues for several years, and the National Grange in particular has always been an early partner and always willing to advocate for these issues. So just know that we're really grateful to you
Good.
and the organization.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
All right, Eric and Nicole, without further ado, I know you have a really impactful story to tell us about how this technology really, helped in a life or death situation. I understand that you were miles offshore during a guided diving trip when Nicole suffered a heart attack, and thankfully you were able to communicate with folks on the ground to get urgent medical care for her. We'd love to hear you, to the extent you're willing, tell us that story and why it really hits home for the conversation we're having today.
Yeah, we were in Belize actually, probably 2 hours off the coast on a dive, a planned dive adventure. Started was it it was I believe it was our second dive of the day. And we went down and I reached probably, I wasn't very deep, but I was probably maybe 30 or 40 feet. And I started to feel a little, I felt something was not right. And I'm a huge proponent of like, listen to your body, especially specifically when we're in those types of situations. We're diving, it's very serious. So I decided to call my dive from the group, went back on the boat and just, I was having a hard time gathering myself and breathing. I had pain in my chest and a little very disoriented. Um, the guys on the boat were kind of just like, oh, lay down. I think that they thought I was seasick.
Yeah.
And which I wasn't, because we actually have a boat, so I'm very used to being out on the water. And then once Eric came up, he recognized that there was something going on. And at that point, I was kind of in and out of not consciousness, but just like things were happening very fast. And once Eric realized that it was we needed to get medical help, he sort of jumped in and sort of, I don't know if you want to take the story from there.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
use
I
it.
think so one of the things that we do is on every dive I carry this, which is our Garmin InReach. So the Garmin InReach is your Leo connected device. They make a scuba dive housing for it, which I'm a big advocate for, and I think every dive master, everybody on a boat should carry one. If you're using a Garmin dive computer, it can connect to the dive computer so you can actually communicate via that, so you don't have to even take it out of the case. So that's kind of the plug for what device we used. I mean, for me, but I want to kind of clarify too that like both of us are very experienced divers. I'm a highly trained technical diver, and a dive master, and I've got a lot of years experience in very high stress environments. I cave dive, I do expeditions. So like, you know, keeping a cool head in this scenario is always also the most important thing. So when I came up on the boat, which was very quickly after her, um, um, I recognized right away that there was a problem, right? And I think this is the big difference of technology is great, but we also all have to remember that it's only a tool in a bigger ecosystem. So, we both have EMS training and we keep current. We both follow common dive practices. We always have an emergency action plan in place, right? We both understand how to perform EMS and we know how to stay cool under stress. And I think those are really important because the dive boat that we were on did not have an emergency action plan. They did not know how to recognize common symptoms. And these were things that I felt like I was able to bring to the table for my wife at that time. So I recognized immediately that she was not fitting the standard I'm tired or whatever, or seasickness. I went over, I diagnosed her. We knew right away she couldn't feel one of her arms. She had pain in the chest. It's a heart attack, right? Instead of freaking out, I kept it calm. I went to the boat captain quietly because we didn't want to start to freak out other people coming on the boat. I said, listen, we have to turn the boat right now. We have a serious emergency. Please keep everybody calm. I'm going to manage it from here. And I asked for a radio, which they did not have. So at that point, I immediately used the SOS function on my Garmin. But because we have an emergency action plan, we know who to communicate with. So I was able to text my son in the States. I was able to text the dive charter company, so the company that was providing the charter at their office, and then coordinate with them too, as well as EMS over the SOS function to coordinate some sort of rescue mission. Now, what we wound up doing is the locals not having a proper action plan, which was unfortunate, didn't realize that there was actually an airstrip quite close by to us. Instead, they sent a fast boat. So we were in heavier seas at that point. The wind had picked up, so they sent like a big, speedboat to meet us. We did a transfer to that boat. All this time, I'm coordinating while keeping EMS going on her. I'm coordinating our current position, her current status for medical services, right? What is her current state, where we are, what our ETA is. I was also able to get in touch with a charter, an airplane, to be able to take her to the mainland because we were on Key Cocker, which only had a clinic. So we needed to get her to an ER. So I was able to coordinate with these three groups to have an airplane waiting on the tarmac. So when we transferred to the fast boat, we made it into Key Cocker. We had a ambulance, which is more like a golf cart, waiting for us at the dock. We transferred her to that. We got her into the clinic. We gave her some medication to stabilize, which is I was able to coordinate with my Garmin through my phone. And mind you, too, this is while getting pounded with water, waves coming over the boat. Like this is all mostly water resistant and waterproof. I'm using my phone to text, which is great. Then from there, we got her mostly at least stable for the minute while the plane was warming up, and then we took her to the plane. We flew her into Belize, which is like a 15-minute flight, and we had, again, through this communication, had an ambulance waiting on the tarmac, got her right into the ER, and just as she was like starting to really crash, we got to the ER and they were able to save her life. And without that communication, I do think, like I said earlier, touching on is the communication 100% saved her life. But it's the ecosystem of the training, understanding EMS, understanding emergency action plans that all come together. And I think we have to understand that we can never just solely rely on technology, right? It bridges a gap and it gives us that communication, but like it comes down to the people and the training, how to use that technology, when to use it. But thankfully, I've only had to use this device 3 times in the field. And all 3 times it's been, either a lifesaver or a, very big assistance to the situation.
It's just an incredible story. One of the things we're going to talk about later is, D2D, direct to device technology, so that, you mentioned your Garmin InReach. You're lucky to have it. It wasn't the only reason you were able to save Nicole's life. And I think it's great advice for everybody to have a plan and have that full ecosystem you talked about. But I do think one of the developments we're seeing is this kind of communications capability and technology is becoming um, more accessible to more people. And so I think more lives are going to be saved, and we'll talk about that.
I mean,
Um,
I to add on to that, I think, one of my other comments is it's great seeing companies like Apple with the iPhone adding low Earth orbit sat communication. I would love to pressure those companies to bring the prices down, specifically on the cell service companies. Right now, it's a premium feature, and there is an SOS function which is free to all, but the ability to track, let my family know where I am. Like for me, a lot of times when I'm in the backcountry climbing, my family can track my location every 5 minutes, and we've been able to use that before. We had a friend go missing. We were able to track his last location. Turned out he just didn't want to respond to anybody. But the benefit of that, and I think getting that into more devices, like you say, gives that ability when people are maybe outside their comfort zone, you know, um, and maybe don't have that action plan and don't have those things to be able to communicate and then get advice from a first responder to say, this is how you manage this situation.
Great advice. Nicole, are you still going to go deep diving?
Oh, yes. I've
Yeah.
I've gone since the incident, and yes, I will not stop diving. And to boot, because we have this. But
Right, right. And Eric, how long have you had that Garmin InReach?
Oh, I mean, I've been on InReach since probably Gen 1. I think before that I had the Spot, which was the first iteration of low Earth orbit communicators, way back. I mean, like I said, I've been an out in the wild guy my whole life. So like much of my free time is spent well off of the grid. I'm a high altitude climber and rock climber. I do scuba diving, like I said, very technical. A lot of these things. So like I've always wanted to have a way to communicate. When the
Right.
InReach came out, it was groundbreaking because it allowed not just tracking, but two-way communication. So, the other benefit of this is not just for emergencies. I can text my family. I can communicate with people. I know we were doing a backpacking trip on the John Muir Trail a couple years ago, and we used the Garmin InReach. It was a heavy winter, so we couldn't get the pack train in to bring us supplies.
Right.
So we found a friend of ours with a plane to airdrop all our supplies to us, which was kind of fun. And we used our Garmin InReach to communicate with them via cell phone, right? And they had an InReach. So on the plane, we could all communicate with our position. They could track our position and they dropped all our supplies to us. So like, it's a very multifaceted device. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much a technology guy, so I'm always on the forefront of like what I can do to make these kind of experiences safer. I'm
Right.
very much about like I don't like to go into things where I don't have, it's a calculated risk, right? And I want to bring that calculation down to as near zero as possible. So for me, adding this kind of technology just reduces, that risk ratio by a significant margin and helps me feel more comfortable to push my limits when I want to.
yeah, and it's also a comfort being a wife of a person who's
Sure.
always out. Like I always know, check in, like, and I know that I can track when he's out somewhere extra dangerous. I can see his movement and activity. So that's always a comfort for the family.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you both. We'll come back to you in a minute. Sheriff Kreider, we're going to go to you next. In April of this year, the Walla Walla County Commissioners approved the use of Starlink for patrol units within Walla Walla County Sheriff's Department. Can you tell us about the difficulties and dangers of the dead zones in your region that motivated this investment?
Certainly. So we have about 1,300 square miles of coverage that we do, and typically, on average, we have about 3 deputies on duty. So there are areas. It's a fairly rural county. There are areas we have both mountains and what they call out here the Palouse, which are very rolling hills. For some reason, that seems to very much limit cell phone coverage and even radio coverage because we just can't afford the infrastructure to put radio towers everywhere in order to get line of sight radio coverage. So our our IT department actually came up with the idea of putting mobile Starlink on our vehicles. So we had areas of the county that our deputies would call out that, hey, I'm going into a dead zone. They know where the dead zones are. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, send the troops, which is not a great solution because a lot of times our response times, even for a backup deputy, are 30 to 40 minutes, depending on where they're located in the county. It also, what a lot of people don't understand is that during the course of driving through the county, our deputies obviously rely on their computer system in order to communicate with dispatch. And as they drive the hills, they come in and out of service. And what that does is it shuts down their computer, and then it takes, minutes for that computer to reboot. In that time, if they're responding code, obviously they're not getting information, number one, that we don't want to transmit over the air because of security reasons, and sometimes because they're in a dead zone, they don't get that transmission anyway. So Starlink has enabled us to maintain that data link for their computers with our dispatch. And even if dispatch can't talk to them via radio, they can talk to them via their chat function on their laptops. The other thing that we found, for those of you that haven't been paying attention, it is fire season on the west side of the United States, and pretty much everything out here is on fire. What we have found is that in the thick smoke, our radio system is severely degraded. We just recently had a 15,000 acre wildfire, and my guys were out trying to notify the limited number of people that live out there. And what we found is the thickness of the smoke severely degraded the radio system. But we had one individual that had Starlink on his vehicle. He was able to keep communications, and then he relayed between the deputies that were out there trying to notify all the residents of the evacuation and coordinate some emergency response stuff that was going on. So we don't have every vehicle. We just got in the equipment, and we're starting to outfit every vehicle. We had a pilot program with about 6 vehicles that had Starlink on it. It clearly proved its effectiveness and proved what it can do. It's been a phenomenal piece of equipment that we will use both in search and rescue and in emergency management when we need to get out and notify people, and just in our day-to-day business when we're out in the rural parts of the county.
And Sheriff, have you encountered any colleagues in other parts of the country and rural localities that have experimented with this, or is it just purely your IT guys came up with it, like you said? And
I don't think it's the first. I don't think we're the first ones. I know that in kind of commercial settings, I've seen it. For instance, I'm a fairly avid shotgun shooter. Obviously, shotgun ranges are not normally located inside the city limits where you get good cell coverage and good, 5G coverage. So I know that Score Chaser, when they arrive at a shoot, they were one of the first ones where I actually saw, probably 4 or 5 years ago, with the mobile Starlink that they would put on their RV, and they had direct, great computer access and good computer speed. I also know that I have a couple of buddies that do a lot of sailing. They have put mobile Starlink on their boats. It's a game changer. I really think that, not to get political on here, but I'm looking at us. We're trying to do internet for all, and we're running fiber optic cable throughout the rural parts of our country or county for 2 or 3 houses. I think that if we just gave them Starlink at their house and they hooked it up, we could probably do it for about 2% of the cost of running fiber optic cable, which is going to get damaged and which we have problems with during storms unless you bury it. And then somebody inadvertently runs a plow or something through it and breaks it. And it has to be powered. So when everything goes out, if it doesn't have power, it's not going to get stuff to it. So I think Starlink is a game changer. I'm a big believer. I personally have Starlink at my house. Believe it or not, I live a mile outside the city limits, and I could not get good, reliable internet service that was halfway, it was like AOL dial-up speed. And I installed Starlink, and it's been a game changer. It's super easy to use, super fast speed. And I think, especially for search and rescue up in the mountains and my deputies on a day-to-day basis, it's been a game changer for what we'll be able to do.
Really fascinating stuff. Thank you, Sheriff. Laurie, we're going to turn to you now. In September, it will be 2 years since Hurricane Helene made landfall in North Carolina, but we know the impact and recovery are long-term and ongoing. In North Carolina's affected areas, more than 66% of cell sites were knocked out of service by the storm, and more than half remained down for days following. If you could, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like being on the ground there?
Thank you, Richard. Hurricane Helene in late, like you said, 2 years ago, in September, caused what the National Weather Service described as the closest thing, this blew my mind when I read this, to a total communications blackout in modern U.S. history. And I don't know how many of you, Sheriff, and then Eric and Nicole, I don't know how aware you were of how bad it was here. But it was awful. And over 200,000 residents in Western North Carolina lost phone and internet due to widespread power failures, severe river flooding, landslides, and completely severed fiber optic cables, which is what we were just talking about. The two primary connections to the outside world were SpaceX's Starlink satellite, and this is so crazy to me, but the kind of unlikely community ham radio operations became the primary connection to the world outside for isolated pockets. I was not there. I live in Raleigh, probably 3 hours away from the mountains, but I've been to the mountains. I went to camp there as a child many times. In fact, I'm going this weekend for a family reunion. So I know the land. My son lived there for a while. I could imagine how catastrophic it was, and I talked to people who were there, many people. On the ground, one of the biggest challenges was simply not being able to communicate. So if you can imagine, there are lots of rivers in the mountains, and most roads run by the rivers, and so does power. And when cell service went down, many families couldn't reach their loved ones. Farmers couldn't contact their suppliers to get food for their animals, much less for them, or emergency officials they couldn't, reach emergency officials. Local leaders were struggling to coordinate assistance for them. Something as simple as a phone call, it was impossible. Many roads were closed for weeks and some for months. And I mean, a lot of months. I mean, I remember hearing roads would finally open so people weren't having to drive so far around. And I would say that Helene was a stark reminder of just how vulnerable our rural communities are, and can be when critical infrastructure is not in place. And in ag communities, of course, as a agriculture membership organization, we were extremely worried about the farmers. They were trying to assess the damage to crops and their livestock and their equipment and their roads, but they had no way to report conditions. They couldn't feed their livestock. So these animals had no food. So they were looking at their livelihood that was starving, topsoil, complete fields of topsoil washed away down the creek. One farmer told us, and this was a hard story to hear, but he watched as his whole cattle herd drowned, washed, just boom, gone right down the creek, and he was helpless. He couldn't do one thing about it. Many people were stranded with no way to get food or medical care. And people I mean, there were people that they loved ones that didn't even know if they were alive because nobody could get to their homes. I mean, it was terrible. Rainfall exceeded 30 inches in some places. Wind gusts were over 100 miles per hour. There were at least 103 deaths, which, when I look back in retrospect, is, so grateful that we didn't have more. More than 53 billion in damage. And as awful as they are, something that statistics can't possibly measure was the sense of despair after the storm passed, and homes were lost, flooded, taken down the creek, roads were destroyed, no cell service, no power. There were shortages of food. People couldn't get to the grocery store. They couldn't get down their driveway. Couldn't get medicine. It was just, you can imagine the overwhelming sense of that. And I actually went through, we were hit by a hurricane in Raleigh in 96, totally unexpected, sort of like it was in the mountains. You think of hurricanes as being on our coast, and I grew up on the coast, so I was familiar with hurricanes, but it decided to just head right down I-40, and it came right through Raleigh, and my husband and I had to move out of the house for almost a year because it was so destroyed. Our street was one of the worst hit. So I couldn't see my neighbor's house the next morning. We live in town, and I couldn't see it for the trees that had fallen. So, I mean, I had a sense of how debilitating it was. The roads were all blocked for probably a week before they could get, because it's an old neighborhood, huge trees. So I have a little bit of an idea of what it felt like. And in thinking about what I could share on this podcast, I decided to have a conversation with one of our North Carolina representatives in the General Assembly. His name is Representative Blair Edens, and he represents Wilkes and Alexander counties, which are located in the northwestern foothills of the mountains. And he and his wife both work for Samaritan's Purse. They're both employed by Samaritan's Purse. And I knew that they had been boots on the ground during the aftermath of Helene. And I heard him speak at a Grange conference this past spring, actually. And I wanted to hear again what he had to say because I wanted to be able to share his story. And he was contacted by Samaritan's Purse, during the storm when it was happening. And they asked him to gather a team to clear the roads so that they could get to the Vipers, which is, I'm not sure, Sheriff, you may be familiar with that. It's VIPER, it's an acronym, and I cannot tell you what it is because it's so long, but it's the public safety radio managed by the State Highway Patrol and is utilized by EMS responders, emergency responders, EMS, fire trucks, all that. But their fuel was running low, and they couldn't get the trucks to refuel them, so they were asking the Samaritan's Purse if they could get folks out there to clear the road. So they did that, but they also carried Starlink satellites to all the places that they could in these communities, to local areas, so that people could come and actually contact the people that they needed to, that they didn't have any communication with. And he just said that it was like magic. It was just a godsend. And while we were talking, Representative Edens got their tech guy on the phone, and he started telling me about it. And of course, it went right over my head. And I guess I can be a little techie, but not to the extent that he was. But we keep using the word game changer, but I think they would say it was an absolute life changer. And after I finished our conversation, I said, you need to be on this podcast because boy, it was unbelievable story. But and just to let you know too, it was such a great story of humanity. During that time, National Grange sent truckloads of hay and other supplies from all over the country to feed livestock. And we don't think about that, the animals, but it's the farmers, it's their income, it's their livelihood. Much less their animals. They love them, they take care of them. And the North Carolina, we collected food, household supplies, and personal items. Made numerous trips to the mountains to deliver it. The Baptist Christian Men's Organization organized volunteers. A really good friend of mine went and spent 4 days. The stories were endless. So here we are almost 2 years out, and Western North Carolina continues to recover and prepare for future disasters. And strengthening the resilience of our communications networks, especially in rural areas, is it's got to remain a priority. And I think Starlink has helped us get there.
Laurie, thank you so much, and
Sure.
thank you for sharing that story. And you're right. You think about the human toll, but thinking about the farmers and the animals that they care for is really powerful. So thanks a lot for that.
Sure.
Um, we've got about 20 minutes left, and in a little bit we're going to answer some questions from the audience. And so to the audience, I would encourage you to start putting your questions in a few minutes into the chat. I've got a couple other questions before we get there. Eric and Nicole, I'm going to come back to you. And Eric, this is something you touched on a little bit in your opening comments. I want to touch on the direct-to-device technology, and there's recently a transaction between Amazon and Globalstar that will help advance U.S. leadership into direct-to-device connectivity, which I think is going to be a really big deal. And you talked about Apple. It's one thing having a Garmin device or, Starlink and patrol cars. But I think for all of us that, have one of these in your pocket all day, having that direct-to-device connectivity is going to be a really big deal. But I wonder, Eric, you've talked about your adventures, if you will, sounds like your whole life. And I was struck by your comments about the ability to stay calm, which I think sometimes could be easier said than done. But I wonder if you could touch on what it was like before you had your Garmin inReach and some of this technology. Have you noticed just that, and you talked about the added layer of, safety and security, not only for you, but for Nicole as well as your spouse. But what was it like before you had those communications tools? Is it fundamentally different? And you talked about the process of safety, and maybe it just required extra layers and to your plan. But go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, before this, there was just no way to communicate. So, I mean, look, we've been going out to the outdoors without communication for thousands of years. So, this is a relatively new thing, but I think that it allows my family to feel more confident and safer, right? They can check in on me. They know where my car is parked. Um, Commonly, like I do these diving trips where we dive in underground cave systems. So we're miles underground. There's no up, there's no out, there's no light. If something fails, you're basically dead. And it allows me to immediately come out in the middle of a forest in the middle of the Dominican Republic and tell my wife, I'm out, I'm safe. And I think that peace of mind changes the equation when I go to do these. In the past, it was, I'm going to go do this trip and you're just going to have to deal with it. And that can strain a marriage. It can strain relationships. It can put people in bad, mental places, right? Whereas now it's like, okay, cool. Let's have an action plan. This is what you're going to communicate. So I always let Nicole know where I'm going, what I'm doing, and my estimated time range, right? Like the sheriff said, it used to be I'm going off grid. In 20 minutes, if I don't respond, send the cavalry. But there's a lot of waste in that because he was fine. He was just caught up or got caught in a pothole or this happened or that, where now I can be in constant communication. I mean, as the sheriff said, with Starlink, like we have Starlink on our offshore boat. So we're out offshore all the time in the ocean, and I have Starlink and I can communicate, I can check weather conditions. I mean, man, I can't tell you how useful that is over just a weather radio to be able to actually look to see that there is a storm coming and we need to get moving. So it's changed the way that we plan these trips. It's also for someone like me, it's allowed me to push my limits a little further because I know that I'm not going to be stressing out my family, but also like we have the ability to make that communication when needed, and we can plan, we can be, again, like I can look at weather coming in, I can look at changes in patterns, I can communicate with people, and I think that's incredibly useful.
Sheriff Kreider, I'm going to ask you that question as well, and you also touched on it, but as a sheriff, you're responsible not only for the community you're protecting, but your deputies. And I imagine just it's one thing to be able to communicate with each other all the time, and you still have stress. But I imagine like when you have those periods where an officer goes dark, if you will, for a time being. That I'm sure that was very stressful. So what was it like kind of before and after? And the second part is, did you experiment before, using Starlink and the pilot? Did you experiment with other technology to try to address the communications blackouts, or was Starlink your really first go at it?
Well, that's a very complex question. There's really not a lot of options when it comes to the communications. So the options are to build uh, more radio towers within the county, which is cost prohibitive. You're talking probably $50,000 between equipment, uh, getting the land, and putting a tower up. And if you got to put 10 towers up in the county, now you're talking real money, and rural counties just don't have $500,000 laying around to put those up. And then that's not even your annual cost to continue to operate those. So um, Starlink was a very simple and very cost effective. The equipment in the grand scheme of things is not that expensive. You're talking a few wires and a satellite that you're putting in the car and the receiver. Um, Not a lot of money, less than $500 per car that you're putting in there. And now you also have the ability, Starlink is enabling you the ability to use your phone via Starlink, so that you're going to have basically telephone communications in addition to internet capability. So those are all things that you kind of consider. One of the things that I think I kind of glossed over is that it really is a game changer, even in those areas where you're not going into a, a blacked out area. As you're progressing to a call, with that computer dropping offline, you have the, not the ability, but you have the opportunity to not get information that is pertinent to the call that the deputy is responding to. So we may have something that says, hey, you may have a guy, sorry, you may have a guy with a gun, and then you drop connectivity, and now they know that that is a BB gun. It's confirmed that it's a BB gun, not a real gun. And the deputy shows up and thinks he's dealing with somebody with a real gun. He doesn't have that information. Or, there's a myriad of scenarios where that information is pertinent into how they're going to respond to that call. And if you're dropping in and out of coverage on the way to that call, even if it's only 5 miles away and your computer doesn't have time to reset, you're going to lose valuable information on that call that may protect the deputy and also may protect the citizen that they're responding to that call for. So it's a game changer for what we do and how we do things on a daily basis, even outside the environment where we're dealing with kind of critical incidents. Just day to day, what seem as routine incidents, it really changes and the playing field a lot.
Thanks, Sheriff. And as a reminder, folks, if you have questions, please go ahead and start entering them into the chat. Laurie, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you just a broader question. Given that the Grange represents North Carolina and also nationally rural communities, agricultural communities, um, how do you see LEO technology and other sources of internet access that improves connectivity on the farm and for agriculture impacts? Are you starting to see the real benefits that that's having for farmers in rural communities in North Carolina, just
Oh,
beyond, emergency relief?
absolutely. Precision agriculture is huge, and it has and you know, broadband and Starlink, the LEOs, as you specifically mentioned, certainly have been able to give farmers that live in remote areas, that farm in remote areas, that may or may not have broadband or it may not be dependable, the means to farm productively and to keep up with that technology. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think when I started at the Grange, um, we were still mailing out policy books to members. A lot of them didn't have email addresses, and we've come 360 degrees since then. So I would say yes, totally. Game changer, as we've all been saying.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. And one of our members from Virginia, where I am, Milan Tran, who's the executive director of the Virginia Asian Chamber of Commerce, had a question for you all. And whoever wants to take it, feel free to jump in. The question is, how is dependable internet infrastructure helping small businesses in your community scale their activities, reach more people, and ensure uninterrupted access to essential online tools and platforms? Laura, you want to take that? How are you seeing it? You just talked about precision ag and how it's assisting farmers and rural communities, but how about small businesses? Have you seen any evidence of expanded LEO technology or broader internet access helping businesses in your community?
In rural communities
Yes, ma'am.
specifically.
Yeah.
Richard, I haven't myself, because I live in the city, but there's most of our members are from rural communities, so I could 100% say that yes, it has definitely been. I mean, I've learned so much about it in the last year that I had no clue. So I would say 100%
Yeah.
that they benefited from it.
Sheriff Kreider, how about you? Have you seen, other industries in Walla Walla County using the technology? You said you personally use it. I'm just wondering if you've seen other applications, not to put you on the spot, but other small businesses or applications.
Um, well, I think Starlink in particular, and hopefully we'll see competition with Starlink at some point so that it kind of drives down the market. But it's actually, it's not unreasonably expensive. I wouldn't say it's the cheapest thing out there. Unfortunately, right now it's the only thing out there in kind of in that realm. But I'm seeing it being used more and more on vehicles, both like commercial farming. You'll see tractors, combines that have Starlink attached to them. I see with like some of the public utilities and even the private utilities on their vehicles, they have Starlink on their vehicles because when they're out at a remote gas transfer site or an electrical junction or something of that sort, now they have connectivity back to wherever they need to be, and a lot of times they need internet service in order to complete whatever function they're doing, and a lot of that stuff is reprogramming computers out there. And if you have something that is 5 megabits an hour, you're not getting anything done. So I think it increases their productivity as well. So you are seeing it merge over into the commercial world, and obviously it's slowly getting into the government side.
I would jump in and say, as
Yeah.
small business owners, we're in LA, so we have great service, but when we are out off grid, like on our boat or out somewhere, I have access back to my company, so we're able to like manage employees and deal with issues remotely. So that, maybe on the other side gives us a little bit of a break from work, which is kind of nice.
No, it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
I think another thing that
Go ahead.
you see that you don't think about, like I just went to the Washington State Sporting Clays Championship, which is in a fairly remote place. They had Starlink. It gives them the ability to process a credit card at a reasonable speed, and instead of having everybody have to show up with cash because you can't process a credit card. So, that's a bonus for a small business that's trying to make it.
It's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric and Nicole, just briefly, I was going to ask you, as you have shared Nicole's story and what you all went through, I wonder, have you met other, adventurers that have had similar experiences that you've learned or that they've shared with you?
I don't think to the drastic
Right.
To our level. I think it's just more or less we know like other climbers and people in the community that are just kind of using we know people that have since my incident have purchased a Garmin InReach just as just reading and hearing what happened. I think it's just the awareness of what's available.
Yeah, we actually had Garmin send the dive shop that we were working out of in Belize to Garmin InReaches for their boats.
Wow.
So, and then gave them, a pretty much unlimited service. So it was, and I reached out to Garmin originally after this. Like I spent my life in advertising. So like I reached out to them and was like, why do not more people have this on them when they're out in the water? We use these a lot for backpacking and, out a lot of got hunters use them, but I was like, why don't we see this more in the water? So I actually reached out to them and said, listen, I have this story for you. I think we should cover this. I think we should talk about this more. And then in return, I want you to send some stuff to the dive shop so they have more access. So, I think, yeah, we do meet people, but I think I just advocate for it. I'm a big advocate when I meet people doing the things we're doing. It's like find ways to be connected. Like I said, this all is part of your emergency action plan. Like you should have this stuff in place before you go to environments. The sheriff is going, his deputies are going into environments. They need to have a plan. For us, I'm going into an environment, I need to have a plan. I need to know what to do when things fail because if you're running around like crazy and you don't know what to do, I don't care what you have on you, it's not going to work, right? So this is one piece of a bigger plan that I advocate, as a guide, as a dive guide, as a climbing guide, everything, I advocate these things like know what you're getting into and have a plan to deal with it. And this is one piece of it.
Well said. I also just wanted to briefly acknowledge, Laurie, in your remarks, you commented on Representative Blair Edens from North Carolina. I wanted to acknowledge that he is on the webinar today. And sir, we appreciate you being here and for your interest and your advocacy. So thank you so much.
That's
Uh,
great.
See a question in here from Claire on the chat, and it is, what action from lawmakers would help state and local governments be more equipped with technologies like this before natural disaster hits? Any of y'all have thoughts on how lawmakers can help this technology be more accessible for state and local governments? Is it just speaking out, educating?
Are you,
I think it goes
I can
back
take it.
right.
Go ahead.
who are you directing that to, Richard? I'm
Anybody
sorry.
can take it. Sheriff, I think you were about to jump in.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was going to say it really goes back to exactly what Eric just talked about. It's no different than when I'm going to do a backcountry hike, backpacking trip, is I pre-plan and prepare, the 5 Ps. Piss poor planning prevents poor performance. That's exactly what happens. I can tell you, we just had 2 Bigfoot hunters in a county not far from here that went out looking for Bigfoot and completely unprepared, and they died. I mean, it's horrible to laugh about it, but they were not prepared for the weather. They weren't prepared for the woods. They didn't know the country that they were in, and they ended up dying in their car from exposure because they didn't plan. And it's no different, I think, for municipalities, and unfortunately for government entities, it always comes down to money. Do we have the budget to afford to buy the equipment that we need to be properly planned before we have a hurricane, a tornado, a fire, a flood, a famine, whatever the malady is that strikes us? We just have to prepare for those and plan for those and think about the communications. And for us, communications is paramount in everything that we do. So we do look at that, and that's one of the reasons that we've migrated towards this solution.
Any other comments on that question? Thank you, Sheriff.
I would add to what the sheriff said too, like even, we're in Los Angeles, we're in like the most urban environment in the country, but we have Mount Baldy very close by, which is a 10,000-foot peak, and every single year we lose a dozen people off that peak because they show up unprepared. oh, I can just go hike this mountain because it's a 1 hour drive from me. And they don't realize that it's 30 below on the summit. There's knife edges, there are cornices, and every year one of us gets a call to go up and help search and rescue. And so, this is where, again, I think we keep harping on action plan, know what you need to do, know your environment, but then devices like this recently, we did have a hiker up there get lost and used his Apple phone with sat service to be able to call for emergency support. And search and rescue was able to find him. So it happens not just in rural areas, like in incredibly densely populated areas, we have big service gaps and we have very rugged environments. I mean, LA, people forget we have some of the most outdoors in the country. We have, the Sierra Nevada and we have our oceans, which are two of the most extreme environments in our country, literally minutes from our doorsteps. So we see a lot of that here.
Well, this has been really terrific. We're going to wrap up, and I wanted to give each of you, the opportunity in case there's anything you would like to share that you didn't have a chance to say, or anything you want to repeat. No?
Oh, good.
All right. Well, Eric, Nicole, Laurie,
Oh,
Kreider, we're really grateful to you all for taking the time out of your busy days to share your perspective. This technology can really be life or death. So thank you for doing that. As a reminder, our coalition is called the Connect Everyone Coalition. Our URL is connecteveryone.coalition.com. Pretty easy. We also have social media, an X page, and would just encourage you all to visit and sign up. You can also sign up for our regular emails. All of what we're trying to do is educate the public and policymakers about the power of this technology and what it can do for human beings and all across the world, not just here in America. So thanks a lot. And again, thanks for taking the time. We really, really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks,
Yes.
everybody.
Bye.
See ya.